Thanks everybody for joining us today. You're here with Sales Intel and Always Hired. And we're here to talk about aligning sales and marketing with a unified data approach. So on the Sales Intel side, I'm Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Partnerships and Alliances. And then we have with us Gabe from Always Hired. Gabe, welcome in.
Hey, Jason, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So agenda today. I'm going to talk really quickly about what is marketing. Why does it matter? It's a relatively recent term that started being passed around. And then we're going to hand it over to Gabe. He's going to talk about some tips for creating better communication and processes, as well as how to use full funnel solutions in your tech stack to be able to align these two departments. All right, so to start off, what is marketing? Why does it matter? So it was pretty entertaining for me to see this term come about, really in the last year or so is when you started encountering it in any sort of volume. But I don't know about you, Gabe, but for me at least, this is always defined marketing's role, which is marketing's in support of sales. If marketing's not helping sales drive revenue, then it's sort of a mystery to me what marketing's doing. And it's always been a head scratcher to me, the number of organizations where marketing's siloed and doing its own thing, working towards its own metrics, and then sales is off doing its own thing, and they rarely talk to each other, much less align on what they're trying to do. Yeah, I mean, what's been your experience on that side, Gabe?
Yeah, I would say the same, and this should be about 30 minutes to all this. I've noticed the same thing, and it's just the industry is changing. First, we saw product management get a little bit more specialized and get its own seat at the table and report to the CEO. And now we're seeing sales and marketing also get more specialized. And essentially what's happening is everyone is starting to prioritize the buyer's journey. And through prioritization of the buyer's journey, it's essentially requiring companies and their internal processes to further expand on their assembly line of how the potential customer interacts with their sales team, their marketing team, etc. So I totally agree, and it seems like an intersection of a few different trends we've been noticing in the industry.
Yeah, I think it aligns pretty closely with, I mean, 5, 6, 7 years ago, you started seeing the emergence of growth as a department or as a title within organizations. Right. As with a lot of this stuff, of course, it originates or really begins to proliferate out of Silicon Valley. But same idea there, that a growth role or a growth department's going to straddle, sales and marketing in particular, but oftentimes also winds up straddling success and even product. Yeah. But anyways, marketing should be pretty self-explanatory. It's a mashup of sales and marketing. And it's referring to alignment between what your sales and marketing teams are doing. And you facilitate this through frequent direct communication between the two, as you're going to talk about, Gabe. It means alignment of metrics and goals, as well as alignment around and coordination around tech stack. So why does it matter? Why are we starting to see marketing trend as a term and as a strategy? Well, first off, aligning both teams can lead to over 200% more revenue from your marketing efforts. So, who out of their right mind is going to object to or question something that's going to more than double what you're doing for marketing efforts? Second, 67% more efficient sales team when it comes to closing deals. And this should make a lot of sense. If marketing is closely aligned with sales, then the leads that marketing is driving and bringing in are going to be more qualified. They're typically going to be further down the funnel. They're going to be better educated. They're going to be better targeted. And they're going to be distributed to the sales team better, with more intel around those leads that are coming in. So whenever you factor all of those pieces in, where marketing is more efficiently and more closely aligned with what sales wants or needs, it shouldn't be a surprise that you get much more effective sales team and get more efficient at closing deals. And then aligning both teams is going to lead to about a third higher customer retention. And again, this one shouldn't be terribly shocking. If you're driving higher quality, better targeted leads, you're doing your better job of educating them to and bringing those to the sales team. Then those that your sales team are convincing to buy are typically going to be a better fit to your product, to your offering. And obviously, the closer and better fit you have there, the less issue you're going to have with churn. The more likely they're going to be onboarded properly. They're going to find the value. You're not going to run into failed onboardings or lack of engagement with the product and stuff like that. So it makes sense. Again, if you've got alignment across these, you've got better targeting, you've got better qualification, then that's going to net and that's going to result in less churn, better retention, higher close rates, as well as better ROI on your marketing efforts. And then Christian, yes, we will, as follow-up to this, you'll get an email with a link to these. If I forget to send you the link for these stats, feel free to reply to that email. I'll make sure and get that to you. All right, so Gabe, we covered here pretty quickly what is Smarketing, why is it important, what's it going to do for you. Let's talk about some of the ways that you can actually effectively implement this.
Yeah, absolutely, an exciting topic for me. And just to set a little bit of a backdrop here, a lot of times when leadership comes to us and says, hey, we need a 200% increase in revenue, it automatically stresses us out and puts us into fight or flight. And not always, but the point is, a lot of times when we hear about these increased targets, we assume it's going to be more work, or we assume it just means more volume. But realistically, sometimes all we have to do as revenue leaders is just make a couple simple shifts and just recognize that maybe the puzzle that we had put together isn't actually complete, and there's one or two pieces that are just misaligned. And that's really what we're going to be going into here is how do we start to hit these targets? How do we start to create the efficiency that everyone is demanding in this current market? And how do we do that while still having some sense of balance in life where we're not just hitting these increased numbers by doubling our workload? And those are some of the things that I'm excited to talk about. So why don't we dive in? So one of the things to be cognizant of is that from a buyer's perspective, a buyer would love everything to be with a single point of contact, but that's not really going to be the case. So what we need to do behind the scenes is we need to make the buyer feel like they're getting a unified experience. And unfortunately, unless your sales and marketing success teams are genuinely unified behind the scenes, how can we expect our customers to feel like they're engaging in a unified experience as they're going through the funnel? So one of the first things we need to do with our teams is we need to be brutally upfront with what needs to happen. And fortunately or unfortunately, that sometimes means that we need to put in more clear KPIs or quotas. So for example, one of the things that I've seen be really effective is not only attaching a volume metric to marketing, but what is the expected conversion that we want sales to be able to hit and that we want marketing to be able to hit from those inbound leads. I see a lot of organizations just managing to volume. Well, the problem is when you're just managing to volume, you can become really inefficient and really bloated. And that can hurt many different ways. It can hurt the company, it can hurt the people working at the company. So what's important to understand is not only the reality of we need leads or we need sales, but what is the direct correlation between the two? Because just like a salesperson knows they need to close 1 out of 4 meetings into a contract, just like a marketing leader knows they need to get a 2% conversion from website traffic to inbound lead, there needs to be that next step, which is, well, what percentage of these leads are converting into either qualified opportunities or deals or sales? And I think having that really clear expectation all the way through, and then actually being able to manage your teams to that as a KPI, maybe it's not their actual quota, but it's a KPI, that's going to start to create the kind of alignment that your customer is going to be able to feel like there's a lift there in terms of the experience. So that's the first thing I would say in terms of expectations, and moving beyond expectations into how to be realistic with your approach, which is my second tip here, is,
Yeah, well,
or go
real quick
ahead.
before we go over to that one,
Yeah.
what, I'm reminded early on in my training on the growth side of things, an example that I was handed was, and this is a pretty common one. So you'll have a marketing department whose primary KPI is number of inbound leads, for instance. Um, and if they're not actually looking forward through that to what's happening with sales, what's happening with retention and stuff like that, it's very easy for marketing to optimize around the wrong thing. So they may be driving huge growth in the number of leads, but the leads that they're generating are terribly qualified.
Right.
So most of that's just creating noise and distraction. None of it's actually converting, which when you're focused on revenue and growth, that's obviously a problem. And so that's where early on, I was trained and learned to try and establish common North Star metrics that can work across departments. So,
Yeah.
at a previous company of mine, the North Star metric across the entire organization that we landed on were weekly active users, because that was something that marketing driving trial users could look to optimize. It's what sales obviously could look to say, hey, are these actually going to convert to close? It's what success could look to be able to see that onboarding worked effectively. Is there risk of churn? It's what product could look to be able to see, hey, did this new feature that we rolled out or this new design change, whatever, was that effective? Because if weekly active users went up, then great. If it went down, then you may need to look at, what did you actually roll out? And so, it's not just a matter of picking metrics strategically that are going to work across those different departments.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good tactical example. Thanks for jumping in and sharing that. And I'll also check in with you after this slide here. So a couple things to keep in mind. So a lot of times we're going to get pressure top down to implement changes immediately. Totally understandable. A lot of times we pass that down the chain of command as well. It is important to keep in mind that we need to create something that is actually sustainable, right? And we want to create something that's scalable and all these buzzwords. But a lot of times if we fall into the trap of now, move, we end up sacrificing the midterm and the long term for the short term. And I know sometimes we have to make difficult decisions, but it is important to understand that this is starting as a holistic approach to unify the team. And then once you can have buy-in of unifying the team, then you can start to roll out KPIs and metrics. And then with those KPIs and metrics, you need a ramp schedule anyways, just like a sales rep would have. So let me slow that down and kind of break it down. So first thing to do is to calculate a ramp schedule. So for example, if you're a marketing team and you have a expected conversion from your sales reps, you should likely build in a ramp schedule for your expected conversion, because the first 5 leads you send them, they're not going to close as well as the leads 100 through 105, right? Once they've had those 100 reps of inbound leads or 20 reps or 50 reps, whatever the number is, the conversion is going to improve. So a lot of times, one of the reasons we get into a tough spot is because we have our end goal, we have our destination, but we don't really have the checkpoints that are getting there. And in sales, it's pretty common to have these types of KPIs where it's like calls or emails, but it's not as common to have those KPIs in marketing, for example, built out as a ramp. So what you can do is you can build out traffic versus leads or qualified opportunities, and then build it out in a monthly schedule to say, hey, my first month, this is what I think will happen, my second and my third month, and then being able to extrapolate that not only based on volume or based on conversions, and then going upstairs and getting sign off on the timeline. And that's just one of the big things I noticed, is that a lot of people end up missing targets because they didn't build themselves a ramp period. The company says, hey, here's our goal. The leader puts together a plan, and it's basically a binary plan. It's basically, hey, here's what I'm doing, and here's the end result that we're going to get. And they're skipping a lot of the middle parts in between. And it's those little anchors in the strategy and in the ramp up of the metrics that really increases the likelihood of hitting the finalized goal. And I know it can be a little bit tough sometimes too to think, okay, well, how do we calculate these ramp periods? So here are some basic metrics and strategies that you can utilize in order to have that. Basic ramp schedules, and these are borrowed a lot from sales, but you have a 3-month and a 4-month ramp schedule. So a 4-month ramp schedule could be 25, 50, 75, 100. And that could account for your marketing lead volume. That could count for your conversion to sales. So maybe by the time marketing and sales is fully ramped up, we expect the inbound lead conversion to qualified opportunities at X, or we expect the inbound lead conversion to sales at Y. But the first month of the relationship between sales and marketing tracking this, it's only at 25% of the expected conversion. So you can do that 25, 50, 75 on volume. You can do it on conversions. You can also do it in thirds, a third, 2/3, and the full shebang after that. So that's something that I found really effective, and some trends that I noticed is that ramp period. Jason, anything I missed or anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it's one of the most common mistakes I see in trying to roll out changes, in particular with sales and marketing, is not giving those changes time to actually to set in. For marketing in particular, those changes typically take a while and can be long tail results. And so for people that don't have the patience or the attention span for it, then, it sort of becomes an ADD problem. It's on to the next thing, or, hey, that didn't work before you even really gave it full chance to work. In which case you wind up chasing your tail all the time. So I think that's absolutely a super valuable point there.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, this is in the current market we're in, being realistic is hyper important.
Yes.
Cool. The next thing is analyzing in real time. So this is essentially also a shift that happened in engineering. It happened in design, and it's the transition from waterfall to agile. And we can take that same waterfall and agile approach that was so successful in engineering and design, and we can apply it to marketing and in sales. So here's an example. A lot of times what will happen is people say, well, we need 2 weeks or we need 4 weeks to validate the A/B test. Well, the only reason they're saying that is because they're basing it on a volume. Saying, oh, over the course of a month, we'll have this much website traffic. That's enough volume to test the A/B. When in reality, if you are under a crunch, or if you're a large enough organization, you can actually accomplish A/B tests in real time through high volume activity. So for example, one way to do it, this is just through an email example, is if you're going to email your entire list, obviously, if you have 10,000 people in your list, maybe you want to test your messaging with 1,000. And if you email them all today, all 1,000, you'll instantly have the open rate that you can scale for your 9,000. You can do similar things with website traffic. With website traffic, you can track specific milestones in terms of volume and the expectations from them. So instead of necessarily having to wait till the end of the month, you can track it every 1,000, every 5,000, every 10,000. Or what you can also do is you can artificially drive more traffic just to accelerate that A/B learning result. And artificially means it could be through paid acquisition. It could be through people in your network that you're just driving to see how they interact, even though they might not immediately convert. And then quietly testing in the background also means that you're constantly running a backup plan. So whatever your main plan is that you're doing, whatever your main strategy is, whether that's a call to action, whether that's the conversion you're expecting your leads to convert to from sales working them, whatever it is that you're doing, you should always, ideally, I mean, I know bandwidth constraints can be a thing, but you should always ideally have the plan B in the background. So even if your plan A is working, you should be asking yourself, well, what would make it so this stopped working? Well, I guess if our website traffic tanked, or I guess if our market tanked, or I guess if our product roadmap was delayed. And then by thinking about if I am on the right track, what could happen to go wrong? And then quietly creating a small testing environment where you can try to offset that risk, so that if something does happen, you're not starting from square zero. You already have had some A/B tests running in the background for like an emergency, which is pretty much how every large organization runs, whether it's a huge public company or whether it's the government. Everyone's kind of marching on their main plan, but they have a plan B in the background, and they're testing some data in the background in case they do have to go to plan B. They have a baseline of information to be able to bring to their team and make quick adjustments. And that's what it means to quietly test in the background. And the last part is not being afraid to be wrong, not being afraid to miss the number originally. A lot of times our actions as human beings are dictated by fear. We all have this thing in our brain or in our body, fight or flight. And when we allow ourselves to be paralyzed by this fear of what is going to be the outcome at the end of this project, unfortunately, that's going to impact our day-to-day engagement with the thing we're working on. So mentally, just be prepared for most of the things to not work. But as long as you're doing a few things in the background and you're thinking of it the right way, you will find the one thing that works. You will find the one thing that scales. You will find the one thing that gets you 200% growth in a down market when everyone else is asking you, how is it possible? So that's the last thing here of analyzing in real time. You're going to see bad numbers all the time. If you're analyzing in real time, that's totally okay. You can wait till the end of the month to kind of put a bow on the metrics, but don't let anything in real time scare you or keep you from moving forward. So those are some of the thoughts that I had, Jason, on analyzing in real time. I don't know if you have anything to share to this.
Yeah, well, I'll try and keep it quick since we're getting close to the end of our time here. I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A. But yeah, I mean, I think your comparison to what's been going on the software development side is key here. I mean, it's all about rapid iteration. It's about constant testing. It's about finding passive least resistance MVPs that you can roll out and test against. And yeah, I mean, if you have the proper, testing and attitude in place, your failures can actually be more successful than your successes as far as the insight you can gain from it and the efficiency you can gain.
Yeah, great point, actually. That's a really great point. The last thing here, I'll be a little more brief here and give it back to you, Jason, so we can do Q&A from the audience. The last thing is aligning incentives. We're all at work for a reason. And there's different ways we like to engage at work. And humans have a few basic things that you can do to keep them motivated. You can pay them and you can give them positive reinforcement. And a lot of times what happens is that the payments and the positive reinforcements are siloed. And because the incentives are siloed and the recognition is siloed, so are the team members in those departments. It's amazing what happens when sales closes a deal, but it's not just sales that's shouted out. It's marketing that's given half the credit. It's amazing when marketing gets an inbound lead for a huge logo that ends up closing, and you don't just praise the sales closer. You give emotionally in your company 50% of the credit to marketing. And what I mean is you give it emotionally by doing these things that we mentioned, Slack, in the CRM, in the all hands shout out, if you're doing a weekly or a monthly internal newsletter. It's important to, whatever shout outs you're already doing, just have them for the other department. And then what you can also do is you can start to implement contests. So sales rep with the highest conversion from inbound leads gets this X reward. Or if we're able to get this rate of adoption from people who do sign up for the product, we're going to trigger this one, this reward. And similar to contests is just the bonuses. And one quick thing on the bonuses, I'll keep this short, is that assuming the changes you're making are going to improve the efficiency of the organization, that's going to make the business more money. That's going to make it easy to pull bonuses out of. So in theory, every time sales closes a deal for marketing, marketing should get a cut. And every time, obviously sales is going to get a cut when they're closing deals from marketing. But I do think it is important to have this two-way clarity. And then you can choose how aggressive you want to be. Some organizations don't treat a sale from marketing worth the same as a sales just from sales in terms of acquisition costs. So the bonuses are different. But I do think it's really important, if you want sales and marketing to be aligned, shout them both out, get them both involved in contests, and maybe even create a preliminary bonus structure that forces their compensation to be aligned. And if you can do that last piece and you already have their buy-in to why it's important, that should give you everything you need to start to see some movement here in the needle. So I'll take a break there, Jason. How did I do there? Hopefully I wasn't too long, and happy to give you.
No, it was perfect. I mean, timing is actually perfect on this. And yeah, the only thing I'd add here to tip 4, it probably goes without saying, but crucial to be able to do any of this is making sure you've got your tracking and attribution in place. Because any marketer can tell you that's the bane of most marketers' existence, is actually being able to track and properly attribute, especially doing multi-touch attribution, because nowadays more than ever, it's coming in across multiple channels. More often than not, you're going to have parallel efforts between what marketing's doing and what your sales team's doing. And so obviously, if you're not tracking all of that, if you don't have a way to report on it, then it makes it impossible to do the stuff you're talking about here in tip 4.
Yep, exactly. And we also have, we can keep going, just a time clock too. We have Christian with a question. So I don't know if we're stopping right at 10:30 and we want to answer it, or if we want to do these last slides.
I can hang on. Let's get through these last one or this last slide as quickly as possible, and then we can make sure that we've got we can hang on.
I'll answer you in a second, Christian. Sounds good. Cool. So the last thing to keep in mind, if you're thinking about what are some of the clear-cut benefits that come from using full funnel solutions in your tech stack, really what you're able to do is if you have one centralized tech stack where sales and marketing can both plug into, that's going to make it easier to do these things, obviously, because that's just creating the infrastructure behind the scenes to validate the theory we're talking about. And on a personal level, when you're able to create this kind of full marketing funnel for your team, it really does help keep people sane. The hardest thing about being remote right now is we can't really talk to people the way we used to, and we don't have all the cues that we used to. We don't have the verbal cues and all those other things and the nonverbal cues. And it's really stressful. I mean, I think it's obvious to say all of us are probably dealing with stress we haven't dealt before. And this type of alignment not only helps your company increase its metrics, but it does help the morale. And not only does it help the morale, it makes it easier for the management team to see the output of what's going on when you have it all centralized in one dashboard. And then at the end of the day, to us, doing a lot of the work here to make the numbers increase, it's going to allow us to get more done in the same amount of hours. And at the end of the day, that's pretty much what we're constantly asked to do, is figure out how to produce more within the same amount of workload. So those are some of the auxiliary benefits and the direct benefits that we'll notice from unifying this marketing and sales approach.
All right. Yeah, Chris, as you mentioned, Christian's got a great question for us. We'll make sure we've got some time to answer that. So Christian's asking, do you see Smarketing requiring a new role/team, at least to start? Who should own, drive, champion this effort change? I've got thoughts on this. I'm sure you do as well, Gabe. I'll let you kick it off if you want, and then I can plug in. But given that you're very much on the hiring and HR side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the sake of time, I'll try to be a little shorter than I have been. If I'm too short, feel free to just if you need. So at the end of the day, this is really about who owns the KPI or who owns the metric. Typically, this is going to roll into one metric. So not always, but a lot of times, someone's going to own this revenue target. Maybe it's the CEO. Maybe now it's a head of revenue. Sometimes I've seen a marketing lead own revenue. I've even seen sales and marketing fall under operations. So the really first thing to identify is who is actually in charge of this revenue growth. The person that's in charge of this revenue growth technically is going to be the one leading this. Now, the problem there is that if that person is the CEO and you're the second in command there, well, the CEO is probably going to make you in charge of it, even though your title might not show that you're in charge of revenue. So at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, who is the last line of defense, so to speak, in terms of making sure revenue targets are hit? And if you can find out that clarity in the company, that's usually the person that's going to be most incentivized to want to create these efficiency gains in order to hit those targets. So I don't know if that was too vague or answered your question, Christian. Let me know if not, and I'll give it back to you, Jason.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with it is you'll see this exist in a variety of roles, departments, and titles. And at the end of the day, I think what you talk about is the most crucial piece. Make sure that that responsibility is well defined, and then most crucial to that is make sure that there is acceptance, agreement, and buy-in from the C-suite on that. If you've got that, then, as far as what title, department, stuff like that actually owns it, largely becomes semantics. So, it could be marketing, it could be sales, it could be operations, it could be a hybrid role or department like sales or marketing ops. It could be, a dedicated role or department like growth, like I mentioned. So you'll see any combination thereof, or you may see something similar to what we're running at Sales Intel, which is, we've got a head of growth, we've got our VP of sales, and then interestingly enough, and it's not one that you always see within this role, but you've got me in partnerships. Of course, I've moved over from the growth role. And all three of us work in lockstep with each other on all of these growth initiatives and keeping alignment between these different departments. So, like I said, at the end of the day, if it's done right, you've got proper buy-in and support, especially from the C-suite, then a lot of it just comes down to semantics. I think that's the more important piece than a specific title, department, role, anything like that.
Yeah, and just one quick thing to that, Christian, if that's too like high level, because we're basically saying it really varies on the company. If you have specific questions or you're unclear on how to implement this, I'm sure you can hit me up after this for sure. I'm sure you can hit Jason up if you have the specific question or you need help with a scenario. Happy to give you more thoughts on it as well. Jason, should we go to Jill's?
Yeah, let's move over to Jill. So Jill's asking, what do you recommend for startups who are constantly looking for quick wins? She finds that they're constantly battling creating long-term strategies, changes versus pivoting quickly when opportunities come along. With a small team, it seems we often have to pick one, and it affects our departmental alignment. So yeah, Jill, I've been in startups basically my entire life, and so I feel your pain there. One of the biggest things that I've had to learn the hard way in startups, I don't know about you, Gabe, but is to resist those needs or tendencies to quickly pivot, because oftentimes it can become a distraction or a case of ADD, like I alluded to earlier, where you're pivoting so often so fast that you don't have time to actually figure out what works or what doesn't. And as you're alluding to there, Jill, then that raises problems of which goals you're aiming at, how do you coordinate cross department stuff like that. And so I think that's a pretty common thing that startups deal with. And it's a double-edged sword. I mean, on one side, it is one of the biggest advantages that startups have, about the ability to be nimble and be able to adjust strategy quickly. But at the same time, that can also come back to bite you whenever you do it too often and too quickly. And so, yeah, I mean, I think in some ways you sort of answered your own question. Like you're seeing the problems that can emerge from leaning on that side of it too much. And so I think that is a challenge for most startups, is to try and balance those.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple things I was going to add to that is that, number one, a lot of times whatever your strength is, it can be your weakness, or at least the inverse of it. Most big companies have to implement strategies just to be scrappy and be able to accomplish short-term goals, whether they launch incubators or investment funds into startups. So this problem that you have, or that a small startup has, right? I mean, we're probably in a similar stage of growth as you, Jill. Is the problem actually is something that is just relevant or relative to our stage. So it's not necessarily something that's unique. That's the first thing I think to take out of this. Everyone is dealing with this problem, and this problem that you have is actually considered an advantage to the largest companies. So I think, number one, reframing the perspective can be really healthy there. The second thing that I would say, and I'm going to speak a little bit from my specific experience, I think one of the things that's interesting here is that Jason and I help our organizations in slightly different ways, so we're able to bring different perspectives here. And I totally agree with what he's saying. I'm just adding context. One of the things that's helped us is always having a North Star. And I know Jason mentioned this earlier, but the North Star changes depending on the stage of your growth. So at some point, your North Star, for example, could be, we just need to generate revenue. It doesn't even matter what people are buying from us, what the products are. If someone wants to buy from us, we're early enough, let's just try to make a sale and grow our client base. At a certain point, you're not just generating revenue to generate revenue. You want to generate it on a scalable way. So you have specific type of customers you're going after. You have specific products you're selling them. So your North Star as a company actually starts to change as you're going through different stages. Having that North Star in mind is really going to help you anchor these decision-making processes. So if your North Star is generate as many clients as possible in Q4, and then someone says, great, well, let's increase our efficiency, it's really healthy to say, hey, let's do that. But I thought our short-term North Star was volume. And now we're talking about efficiency. So always bringing people back to this one sentence, this one North Star of what is the direction we're rowing in is really helpful. And that's something I personally have to do with the team all the time. And for myself, when we're balancing different priorities, I just ask myself, wait, what is the most important thing this quarter? And by being able to answer that with a one sentence answer, it does make it a lot easier to filter all of the other things. What I will also say, just coming from my position, and I try really hard not to do this, but I know I sometimes do it. And I think everyone in my role does it, and we try not to do it. We're really careful as leadership sharing what we think should be done or sharing opinions, because we know inherently it can carry a lot of weight. Unfortunately, sometimes leadership might tell you something in passing, so to speak. And because we're so good at our job and we're so good at being detail oriented, we hear every little word that they say. But unfortunately, sometimes leadership is not perfect either, and they might say something they don't fully mean, or they might say something they don't fully understand or they haven't thought through. And then it's actually up to you to fully digest that, not act on it. And then if you do feel like there is a conflict, if you do feel like there is a lack of clarity, it's totally okay to push that up the line and say, hey, you said do this thing, I'm happy to do it. Last week you said do this other thing. Here's why I think they conflict. Here's what I think the results will be of working on both at the same time. I'll do it, but that's what I think the outcome is going to be. Am I still marching forward under these guidelines? And having that level of insight and communication, I think, can really take care of how you handle these weird scenarios where you're balancing priorities and constantly pivoting. So hopefully that was specific enough, Jill. Hopefully it wasn't too long. And that's my answer there, Jason. I'll kick it back to you.
Cool. All right. Well, we're about 10 minutes over. I appreciate everybody that hung around. Gabe, this has been excellent. Like I mentioned, we did record today's webinar. We'll get an email out to you tomorrow with a link to the recap that'll have both the recording as well as the deck on it. And yeah, I think that's everything, Gabe. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, everyone, thanks so much for joining. If you have any questions, you can email me directly, gabe@alwayshired.com. I'm also really active on social media, Gabe Moncayo, especially on LinkedIn. So thanks everyone so much. Jason, this was a ton of fun, so I appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah. And then, like Gabe was saying, email addresses are here on the last page of the deck. Like I said, we'll get an email out to you tomorrow that's got a link to the recap. It'll have the deck as well as the recording on it. So you can reply to the email directly, or you can pull either of our email addresses here off of the deck as well. All right, guys. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, everyone.